Welcome to the very first Australian Slacklining Association Access Series podcast. So we're excited to be coming to you. And why are we doing this? Well, highlining and slacklining are at risk in certain areas at the moment, have been excluded from those areas, those public spaces. The Blue Mountains being one of those. And the Blue Mountains was the first place I walked a highline, so it's special to me, and it's sad to think that if the draft management plans gets through, we would certainly have less access to that space. We would need it's an activity requiring a permit under the draft management plan, and I know in other places with Mount Greville, when we've applied for permits, and Brisbane City Council, slacklinings are activity requiring consent, and I've applied for permits and haven't been successful in these situations to keep slacklining. So we've got some challenges ahead of us. I've been highlining in areas and been yelled at from boats by police to take the lines down in a fairly fairly aggressive manner. We've applied for permits to have gatherings of more than 40 people in areas in Queensland, and we haven't been successful. We've got the Grampian situation where many areas of climbing are now banned, and that flows through to probably meaning highlining is also not allowed in those areas. And certainly we believe that slacklining is a legitimate user group in these public spaces, but it's not necessarily a constitutional right. We have no greater rights than any other users of the spaces. So we've got some challenges at the moment to legitimise the sport of slacklining, and look at, are we better off getting on the front foot rather than asking for forgiveness, not permission? Because if we look at climbing, that hasn't necessarily been a successful way to operate. And so, yeah, we really want to, they're the challenges, but the podcast is about what can we do about it. So what's going to be most effective? How can we get on the front foot and stand up for our right to use these spaces and engage with the managers of these spaces that will I guess let us keep slacklining and highlining there, and we've got some great guests on the show that have more experience than us in the space of access, and have some experience on what works and what doesn't, and what keeps areas open to use them. So we're going to be sharing them, and the first one today is with ACAQ President Peter Martland, and ACAQ is the Australian Climbing Association Queensland, and they really led the way with setting up a climbing access association a long time ago, compared to, say, Victoria, who scrambled to set one up as Grampian's issues came about. So I'm keen to hear the lessons learnt from ACAQ from decades of experience fighting for access for climbers, as we're beginning our journey for access. And in the same way climbing was an emerging sport back in the 1970s when Peter started climbing, slacklining and highlining is an emerging sport now. So I'm very interested to see what parallels there are and what lessons can be learnt. So welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us. So wanted to start by maybe painting a picture of climbing back in the 70s. What was your first climb? Who were you with? Tell us some stories from what climbing was like back in the 70s.
Well, plenty of stories. I probably started scrambling on boulders in my local reserve in Castle Hill in Sydney, which is now an established bouldering area. It's got its own guidebooks and stuff like that. I was probably about 13 years old when I started going vertical instead of horizontal. I guess my first real climb was in the Blue Mountains, and it was the mantle shelf on the Three Sisters, which is actually closed. It closed maybe 20 years ago for cultural reasons. And the mantle shelf, I think, is about grade 10. It had it's either a bolt or a piton, I think, in its 20 metres. And this was before we had our hands on Kern metal rope, so we had a 3-ply nylon rope, which you just tied around your waist. So we didn't know any better. We did a lot of stuff on the easy stuff around Mount Boyce and Three Sisters, Narrowneck, Mount Pittington. Never saw anyone for a long time. It was probably 100 climbers in Sydney back then, and it's slowly grown. We kind of operated alone in groups. It was like school friends and then people that we met slowly at the crags. I guess a community started developing outside of the Sydney Rock Climbing Club, which was pretty much the only place to go back in those days. When we started looking for new routes on Narraneck, and we always used to camp in this cave called the Sin Cave, and it became the Sin Cave Club, and a whole bunch of luminaries, I guess, current luminaries came through. There was, people, it was driven by Andrew Penny, but people like Warwick Baird and Giles Bradbury and the recently departed John Smoothie, who's just these legends. And it all began with us just living in the dirt as teenagers and finding new routes. That was probably the first time as well that people really started venturing out of the cracks in the Blue Mountains and started looking at the faces. And then we started putting bolts in to protect those routes. But in the beginning, it was hand drilling on lead, so it was occasionally frightening. And you'd only put a bolt in when you were terrified. Yeah.
Bolting sounds fun.
Yeah, not.
So,
especially with a hand drill.
So were you kind of like, was there much sort of specific gear for climbing floating around, or were you sort of using it for something else?
Yeah, that was the days of hexers and stoppers and pittons, and we didn't have camming devices for quite some time. Yeah. But we just hang off a skyhook and put a bolt in, and and carefully watch that skyhook.
And did you run into many sort of bushwalkers and other people in these parks that you have any interactions with them, negative or positive?
Not really. If we were climbing on the Three Sisters, that was in public view. But places like Mount Pittington or Mount Boyce or Narraneck were off the beaten path for most. So you'd only met other climbers down there.
And did people, like on the Three Sisters, did people that see you say it was cool, or did they say, what are you doing? Do they think you're daredevils? Or
I don't think anyone ever said anything. They'd watch and then kind of wander off.
Yeah.
They probably thought we were mad, actually.
Yeah. And has that changed now? Like when you climb, I guess there's a lot more climbers around. Is there more bushwalkers around too that you run into?
Certainly, it is location dependent. So if you're, say, at Mount Gungun, popular area is Andromeda, you get people wandering down the path off the main walking path and checking out. They're probably lost, actually. They stumble upon the climbing area and they hang around and check it out. Yeah. Of course, you see a lot of people on the approaches around Mount Shibregagon or Biwa, but generally, if it's a small crag, you won't see anyone but climbers there. Certainly, the population, both for all outdoor recreational pursuits, it's just skyrocketed.
Yeah, you've seen that in your time?
Oh, yeah, from almost knowing everybody to almost knowing nobody. It's quite amazing. I had a look at some federal government data. It was the Australian Sports Commission data from a study probably done last year, and they were saying they probably included indoor climbers as well, but we're getting up to probably 450,000 climbers in the country, which I guess at least half would be indoor. But they drift into the outdoor as well, so it just makes my job a little harder as time goes on.
Yeah, so there's a couple of avenues I want to explore there, but I mean, 200,000, even if we say half of those go outdoors, 200,000 people is a decent amount of a user group to be lobbying for access, isn't it? Like it's
across the country, yeah. The estimate for Queensland was, I think it's around 35,000 with potential growth in the next 5 years to about 50,000 climbers. So let's just call it 25,000 that are outdoors. And, you probably wouldn't see them a lot because everyone's off in the bush doing their thing.
And so And you said that it makes your job more challenging. So what do you mean by that when they go from indoors to outdoors?
Well, it's the impact, I guess, initially. So, more people means more impact on the locations. So we need to look at areas that are getting high use and manage those, with trail care or crag keg days. The other thing is, from my background, I came from a bushwalking tradition, and I think a lot of people, even a few generations past me, also came from a similar tradition. Now a lot of people are coming out of the gyms and going outdoors, and they probably aren't as schooled in, leave no trace principles or how to behave, or even what you can and can't do in parks on the national estate. So that's an education piece for ACAQ to try and bring those people into knowledge of how to operate once you're out there in the parks.
Yeah, like when you were climbing back, I guess when you first started climbing, did you imagine that you'd sort of be in this place where one of your climbs that you first climbed on, you can't climb anymore, and you'd go out and you wouldn't see anyone, whereas now you'd at least see the trample. You might see the trampling at the bottom of a crag, or
the world was our backyard back then. It never entered our thoughts that one day you could lose all this. But talking about impacts, I went out to Mount Pennington probably last year, I think, and I hadn't been there for many, many years. And there's these really easy climbs that we used to just run up and down when we were kids. Faith, Hope and Charity area, and it's kind of a tide mark. It's almost a metre. Those climbs are almost a metre longer from erosion and trampling compaction.
A metre what, sorry?
The climbs are a metre longer. The ground has subsided to the point where the start is different. Yeah.
Cool. So the climb's got a metre longer from the
from use.
Yeah. And so what other? So when you said, the world was your backyard, our backyard, we never thought we'd risk of losing it one day. I mean, when was the first hint that you remember of, hey, might not be as easy as it used to be to access these spaces? When did you first kind of get an inkling of that?
Well, I moved to Brisbane in 2007, and so I've got very little history of Queensland climbing at that time. And I was not aware of the closure of Coonurin in Glasshouse Mountains, which happened in 2009. So obviously no idea then. It wasn't on the radar. I was introduced to ACAQ by Mark Gamble, and that was purely so I could get a free DVD of climbing in Queensland.
Yeah.
And I was just a financial member for several years. And then the Grampians issues popped up. And I was talking to David Reeve in the climbing gym about it. And he urged me to take over as secretary. I guess he saw some qualities there. But that was when I first thought, oh, shit, access is an issue.
Yeah.
And the Grampians indicates that everything could be lost. We could have, vast closures like they did down there.
It's worth, what motivated you and what made you think that it was worth becoming a secretary of a climbing association?
Firstly, ignorance, I guess, of what was involved. The secretary then, Chris Williams, was hoping to retire from the position. So I thought, I'll just give it a go.
Yeah,
it can't hurt.
And what surprised you going in? Like now that you've been in there a few years, what were you naive about?
Well, I wasn't particularly naive about the secretary's role. It's just pretty much an administration role. The secretary does whatever's necessary to keep the organisation compliant. Organises meetings, does annual returns, all that sort of stuff. So that wasn't an issue. What I guess I found challenging was that shortly after I became secretary, the Minto situation blew up, and that was getting fairly high profile. And that was probably my ordeal by fire.
So take us through a timeline of Minto, because at one point I was looking back through the minutes, and so, I mean, give us the background on Minto Crag. At one stage, it looked like ACAQ was, maybe I'll let you tell the story.
Okay. Well, it is a wonderful sport climbing crag. It's probably one of the best in Queensland. It's got lots and lots of very long hard routes on it. But some of the neighbours objected to, one, the land being used by the public. I think they may have considered it a bit of a private enclave. And there's a traditional climbing faction that's dead set against vaults, and they were railing against this. We initially sought some advice from the Department of Resources because it was unallocated state land. I was fortunate to get access to the Director General of the department, and he got it going with some pretty engaged people. They offered us the rights to become trustees. We declined at that time because we couldn't work out how to handle liability as trustees. And then the next step was, okay, well, let's try and make it a council recreation reserve with council taking liability. So we assisted the department in the submission to council to adopt it as a recreation reserve. And for various reasons, there was a lot of bad press in the local newspapers, somewhat biased, I would say. And council, of course, will always look after its local constituents over other
tourists.
Tourists. So based on those two main things, I guess, that the risk and the bad press that we've been getting and looking after their constituents, they decided not to undertake any trusteeship arrangement, which is fair enough. And shortly after that, there was, or perhaps during that period, there was a change of states, or there was a state election and a change to the department. And everyone we were dealing with, including the Director General, no longer worked for the department. And everything went quiet. There was instances of people being booked by compliance officers for being on the land, or a lot of investigations into bolting, etc. We kind of didn't agree with what was going on because they were trying to book people for bolting without a permit. We argued that you didn't need a permit for bolting because there's a list of stuff in the Land Act which specifies what you need a permit for. And at the end of, it talks about buildings and fences and, things to do with perhaps making money out of agriculture or other uses of the land. But at the end of the particular clause, it says, or any other thing. And their interpretation was, well, a bolt's a thing, so we can bust you for that. Everything went quiet. There was no response from our submission from our lawyers about the interpretation of the Act. I could go through a bunch of legal drawstrings, but that would probably just bore the listeners. Yeah, everything went quiet, and the next thing we hear from the department, this is months down the track, is that it is being handed over to a newly created Aboriginal corporation and would be kind of given to them in freehold. There was no consultation, and that's kind of when the alarm bells rang with us that the ability to do things behind the curtains without consulting other stakeholders is a big flaw in the Land Act. And it's something that we probably need to deal with.
And so that was given in freehold. So that means that's it, like in terms of...
That's it. That's it. It can't be sold. It can't be moved on. It's in perpetuity. So people have asked us, can we climb at Minto again? And I guess the answer is, well, If the owners permit it, yes, but I think it's unlikely, certainly in this generation.
And once the department changed over, you're saying there was sort of no consultation. But prior to that, I was reading in the ACAQ notes and minutes and stuff that at one stage that ACAQ had committed a botanist or someone to look at the impacts on the fauna and flora in the area. There was also meetings with traditional elders of the area. So things must have been positive for ACAQ to sort of keep going down the path. I mean, if they'd met...
Well, that was part of our gathering our facts for a submission for the council trusteeship. The traditional owners never said, "Sure, you can climb there," but they never actually said, "We don't want you to climb there either." So, and again, it depends on who you talk to in those communities. People have different opinions, like in any other community. So, but yeah, we did a lot of groundwork, but all to naught in the end. New people at the helm, and we had no traction whatsoever. So it was probably our greatest failure. I would say our most important failure, because we learned a lot.
Yeah. So what was learned? I guess
I think one of the main lessons is perhaps get your ducks in a row before you go in and start developing an area. Make sure you have appropriate tenure in place, and that you have proper consultation with neighbours and whoever other stakeholders, and set some ground rules for an area with regards to access and care and the ethics involved in the area. And only then should you really consider going in and doing the work.
And when you're saying develop an area, you mean bolting for sport climbing?
Oh, not necessarily. Development could also be traditional climbing or bouldering. Yeah. I actually don't like the word develop, but it's in common usage.
Yeah. What's another way to? What should we be saying instead?
I don't know. I haven't given too much thought to it, but I'll have to get my thesaurus out.
Opening up access in a structured, good way, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And so the Minto story. I mean, the bad publicity from the local newspaper didn't help. I imagine with the council or whatever.
Not at all. There was a lot of. Well, it was biased.
Yeah.
It was looking for bad things. Always looking for bad things. They would never publicise anything that actually showed another side to the story. It was misquoted or quoted out of context, a lot of the stuff that we were saying. So it was just a very bad experience with journalism, which makes me very, very wary of I get a lot of journalists asking for comment on things like rescues up in the Glasshouse Mountains, and I just don't do it.
Yeah. And
you just don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to pay. I guess the negative news sells more than the positive news, and
yep, that's their job.
And
got to get the bucks in the door.
Yeah, I mean, the headline for Minto when it got was Minto was saved by rock. The wall was saved by rock climbers destroying it or something, and it was the council saved it from the rock climbers.
It was, it was quite emotive.
And and the farmers are a challenging one too, because I mean, I've grown up on a farm, and farmers feel pretty connected, and they have a strong sense of entitlement or ownership of their land, and often they kind of don't want people on the land next to them because they kind of think it's all theirs, or so they can be. I hear there was a positive farmer at Minto as well that had scouts on his area for some time. I was reading, but you can also get.
He had. Ironically, he had lots of bolts on the cliff on his land. Yeah. But he was the guy that was most strident in the anti-bolting movement on the adjacent part of the cliff.
Yeah.
Some irony
there.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's some challenges there. going forwards, I guess. I mean, what do we do now with the new areas that are going to come on the radar, or how do we approach those?
Yeah, we've got a few. We've got a really good cliff which is currently being worked on. It's a council electricity easement, which I think is a lovely tenure. It's already kind of industrial. Yeah. It's in a beautiful location. It's an enormous cliff. It's 80 metres. And I think at some point we might introduce you guys to that.
Yeah, cool.
Because there's some pretty good locations for you. But it's early days. Yeah. And, I would, before we open it up to other user groups, we would probably have to get together in a huddle and say, well, what do we want to do with this area? And
what are the steps we think you would be going through? What are the minimum things you'd want to have in place? What's coming to mind?
First thing we do is we look at what tenure it's under. So we'd do a land title search. And we could work out, whether it's council easement, unallocated state land, privately owned. So that's the first thing you do. And it shows you the boundaries. We check the boundaries of those lots. So we know exactly what we're dealing with from a legal sense. And after that, depending on what it is, it's like, well, what tactics are we going to employ here? I spoke about the risk of litigation, which stopped us from becoming trustees at Minto. But we're exploring a different legal structure under corporate law, which I think would probably satisfy any exposure to liability by any individual or any incorporated association. So just going down that path, if we can do that, we could certainly start looking at taking on trusteeships of certainly unallocated state land. There's a couple of sites in the scenic rim which are of interest to us. So it's early days, but we're going to start working in that area. We need to expand the climbing estate because pretty much everything's in national park and it's getting hammered. And, national park or QPWS would certainly support anything where we are taking pressure off their parks.
And so that's exciting. I mean, if there's indications that we may be able to come up with a way that you can do the trusteeship, surely that's pretty exciting, isn't it?
That's a big win, yeah. And even going as far as buying pockets of land if it's under freehold, and setting that up as a recreation reserve under trusteeship.
Yeah. Because
so it's.
I think
So the options are quite good. Once you fix the legal problem, the world opens up a little bit.
Yeah, and the legal problem often is spoke about like it's impossible. But I know I got insurance to teach highlining, and people would speak about like, oh, you'll never get that. And then I just sent in a bunch of paperwork, worked with some people, and got insurance for $2,000 a year. So the hurdles aren't always, the hurdles can be overcome, I guess.
I think it's a different case of if you're supervising an activity and it's versus a climbing area where you've got people doing perceived high-risk activities, and I say perceived because I don't think it's particularly high risk. Unsupervised, unknown people unsupervised doing high-risk activities. It's hard to get insurance for that.
And and that is a thing, isn't it? The perceived high risk. I mean, we come across that with slacklining and highlining. We can, until it's explained in great detail, people think it's not only high risk, they actually probably think it's reckless.
Yes.
Which makes it difficult to have conversations about using it on the land when it's seen as not just high risk, but actually it's a reckless activity and it's an extreme sport and etc.
Adrenaline junkies. Adrenaline is not your friend in these sports. No. So we're certainly not junkies.
No.
But it's trying to change the perception of what we're doing. I mean, I had a meeting with Brisbane City Councillor yesterday, and I was explaining to her that the risk of injury with rock climbing is proportionally infinitesimally smaller than mountain biking. Yeah. Which is an accepted activity, and people aren't regarded as reckless in mountain biking as much as they are in our sports.
No.
So it's certainly something that needs a perception change.
Is the Olympics going to help that, climbing in the Olympics and climbing coming to Brisbane?
Yeah, it's getting a high profile. I think the Tokyo Games, it was the first or second highest new alternative sport being watched.
Yeah.
I like the skateboarding heaps, actually.
Yeah.
The skateboarding was pretty cool. But the climbing comp was really good, and that really exposed that to the world.
Well, you look at skateboarding and BMX, I mean, they're pretty... If you do a flip and you land on your head, you don't have a rope to catch you like you do in climbing or highlining.
Yeah.
And yet it's not...
far higher risk of injury.
No, and it's not necessarily considered reckless to be going out and doing jumps on a BMX bike.
No. Yeah. Perception.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, I guess, for both slacklining and climbing to continue to legitimise and work on, I guess.
Yeah. I'd leave base jumping to one side.
Yeah, for now. Yeah.
But I'm sure if you spoke to a base jumper, they'd go, no, it's you do everything right, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, when I've watched them operate, I'm amazed the professionalism and the mental rehearsal they go through before they jump. And in terms of risk management, you wouldn't see a better example of risk management in action.
Oh God, no!
And I sort of work in
you're putting all the chips on the table, so you've got to manage it.
No, and I work in mining and so engineering, and we're dealing with risk all the time and paperwork about risk management. But with things like base jumping and highlining and climbing, I guess we're dealing with it, and if we don't deal with it well, we cop it immediately.
Yeah, so an immediate spanking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think risk is good. Like I think risk is can be a good teacher, and I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Excellent teacher. When I hear people say, "Oh, I'm too scared to do that," or I've got a fear of heights, my answer is, "Me too." It's natural to have a fear of heights. But what we're actually doing is learning about ourselves and how we address our fears. And quite often fear is just a construct of the mind anyway. And the management side, which is, all right, I'm going to address some of those fears by closing off a few areas where a bad thing could happen. So I think it's good for personal development. It certainly is good to be scared and then get through it. And I think it's something that a lot of the population just avoid altogether, so they don't actually have exposure to that development.
Yeah, and I've found the lessons carry through to life, like how I learned to approach highlining, both from my stress management that I learned, both from the example of, hey, this looked impossible, I practiced and I achieved it. That lesson carries to life. So I think that's underestimated too, that allowing access to these outdoor spaces to slackline, highline, rock climb, the lessons we learn, not just the physical benefits, the mental, spiritual benefits, surely carry over into the rest of our life, which makes us better humans, which makes us better stewards for the environment.
Absolutely, Dan. Yeah.
And it's frustrating if we're not allowed access to those spaces because we're trying to minimise the impact to the environment. But by making a person they become better stewards for the environment, they make probably wiser decisions, which has a large impact, I believe.
Yeah. We talk about better stewards, and I believe our sports, because you spend so much time in a particular place, you develop a love for it, and over someone who's just travelling through it on a bike or walking, you develop this particular affinity with the place, and I think that also fosters good stewardship. Yeah,
you develop a care, I guess. You care for it.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
So, what should climbers and slackliners do, I guess, if they care and they want to keep accessing the space? I mean, what's the best ways to be involved with maintaining access? And
Yeah, there's a few parts to it. From a climbing perspective, get involved in crag care initiatives. We do some work with park rangers to clean up, graffiti on certainly the Glasshouse Mountains, where you've got, I guess I would call them people that do the scrambling routes, that think it's a community service to paint arrows to show the route. So we go up and scrub them off, and that's winding back to people that perhaps don't have a particularly fine-tuned leave no trace ethic because it's not from where they come from.
The challenge is that the media often reports scramblers as climbers, though, don't they? I've seen.
Oh yeah.
Someone falls off the mountain and they're a scrambler or a hiker. They're called a climber.
Yes. Some things are impossible to change.
Yeah. And highlining, we have the same because it often reports in the news as tightrope walking.
But it's not tight.
No. And probably the only reason I care is because tightrope walkers don't have a harness, so it is seen as a bit more of a risky activity, whereas we have a harness. And
and people just think you're crazy.
Yeah.
So
saying that, I find it interesting that I make an effort when we're highlining, especially in a public spot, if people see us, to go and talk to them, because I want to make sure that they leave with a positive interaction, and mostly,
and they're comfortable with what you're doing,
and mostly to explain that we've got a harness. We're not reckless. We've carefully set this up, and always actually people think it's great. Often people tell me I've made their day by coming up and this lookout. But it's not always the case when we sort of talk and hear from parks and different land managers, because they say that people are worried the visual amenity of the place is affected and so forth. But I've never experienced one of those people, but maybe there are some.
Rush back to the station and complain.
Yeah.
Who knows? You'll never know. We were talking about what we can do to enhance access. So certainly caring for the places is one big thing. We have regular focus areas. We actually do an annual cleanup at Kangaroo Point. Like I said, we help the rangers with anything they need. We identify areas that need work, and we'll work with parks to get works happening there. We're doing a lot of trail work at Frog Buttress down at Mount French. So those sort of things certainly are very useful. It shows that you're a responsible user, and from general membership, just turn up for those working parties. I really enjoy working with the rangers and making new friends, and the work parties are always good fun at the end. You're working with a bunch of people that you may never have met before, but everyone's there with a common purpose, and that's pretty cool. And
so what's
from an ACAQ perspective? Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Dan.
What sort of work do you do in these trail care and crag care?
We look at things like, I'll just use Frog Buttress as an example. There's a bunch of unnecessary trails that have just developed over the years. So closing a few things off. The gully approach gets worn out fairly regularly. So maintaining the gully approach into the bottom of the crag. Weed removal, that sort of stuff.
And I guess one reason that's good is just because it's good to do. It's good for the environment. But also it does, I guess, have payback effects for climbing, in that it shows rangers that we care. It shows the general public that we care. Paints us as better stewards.
Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, if you look at Mount Arapiles in the 50s, it was just drought-stricken sheep grazing with a rifle range, with the back of with the cliff being the backdrop to the rifle range. And you look at Mount Arapiles now, and it's just been rehabilitated back into its natural form, mainly through the work of climbers, local climbers, over that 50, 70-year period.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to cut the mustard when we look at access.
Yeah.
Or closures at Mount Arapiles now.
It's certainly not the not the only thing.
No one wants to look at that aspect of look what we've done over the years. It's like, no, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah, it's easy to be demonized in the media, it seems, especially for climbing down there.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's it like working with rangers at these things? I mean, rangers must care about the environment too.
Rangers love their place, and as much as we do. And that's why we're there together. And I like talking to them. We get their perspective on the park. We understand their issues, and we get to discuss ours. So we have this two-way conversation, and it's probably one of the most valuable things you can do.
Yeah, there must be some strong common ground. And what are the...
Well, last time I was up on Mount Biwa, we're climbing, taking arrows off the East Face route, and one of the rangers is a climber, and he was looking for partners because his wife couldn't get out as often as he would like. Yeah. It's like, mate, we'll just drop you into the mix,
Yeah.
And he appreciated that. And the other girl that was up there, she was a very competent scrambler, but she goes, I wouldn't mind actually going a bit further with this. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean,
take them out.
Surely those relationships can be valuable because we've got such common ground. They both care about the environment. I can't imagine they went to be a ranger if they didn't enjoy being outdoors.
No, they love it. Absolutely love it. And it's not like you're doing it for the money.
No, and so what when you talk to them, what in their eyes makes them see climbers and so forth as positive versus what annoys them, I guess, or what comes across as negative?
Well, yeah, of course, seeing us there is a positive, that we have that common thread. And we can talk about what annoys them, it's things like bolting without permits or overuse of some areas, So we can discuss these issues in an informal way. And of course, we also have formal meetings. We've got a Southeast Queensland climbing group, which is ACAQ and QPWS Southeast Queensland region, and that's at principal ranger level. So it's fairly high management, and so we can talk formally about issues and processes and procedures that we need to implement in a meeting context. But to be out in the field with Joe Rangers, it's just wonderful.
Because that kind of ties into communication principles in that the best way to communicate is to understand the other person's point of view, which is surely going to be beneficial rather than kind of trying to go in with no information, no data, no understanding of the other side's concerns.
Yep. It's probably very hard to win an argument if you don't understand the issues on the other side.
Yeah.
So
So what about bolting? We might go down that rabbit hole a little bit. So in order to climb and sport climb, bolts are required. Highlining, we can bolt. We can also use natural features such as we can use trad gear, or we can wrap rocks or boulders.
Or trees.
Yeah, trees. Yep.
Yeah.
So
sport climbing. I mean, it's probably a fact that's been ignored over many years, as you said, seeking forgiveness rather than permission. But QPWS are taking a pretty hard line, certainly in the Southeast Queensland region, that they don't want to see any more bolts in national parks at this stage, something akin to a moratorium. You can't do it without a permit, and that's been in law for a very long time.
So has there been instances of permits given in the past, or
no? They have parks have their own bolts. They've got some abseiling installations at Point Pure, I think, up at Bria. There's some stuff set up at a small crag on Mount Gunga, and they have rescue installations here, there, and everywhere.
Have they given any indication?
So if I wanted a permit to put a sport climb up right now, it would probably be put into was left in the inbox for a while. So we're dealing with them on a way forward, and it's probably going to take some time, but we would like to see, as part of their visitor management strategies for parks where we climb or wish to climb, that those areas are designated, and you could perhaps in concept have an area that's designated as a sport climbing area, and that means that you might have a blanket permit to establish climbs. Early days, but we're having a look at a model that's being used at Joshua Tree National Park in the States, where they went down the path of designated areas. It's a trad area, or it's a bouldering area, or it's a sport climbing area.
So it's hopeful.
And that's, yeah, a lot of our constituents are not happy because they would like to have absolute freedom to do what they want. But all I can do is point to the law and go, you go ahead and do that if you want, but we can't support you if you get busted.
Yeah.
We don't have any legal grounds to support you.
And so what that means probably for highlining, I guess, is that we're under the same thing in that, we can only really use existing bolts. Have they given any indication that they would remove existing bolts that weren't set up by them, or is that in risk?
Not really. There's indications that, well, we are talking about a couple of locations where bolts have been put in areas of high cultural significance where climbing is actually prohibited in their management plan. Yeah. So you haven't already been told. So that's something where QPWS would employ contracts to take those bolts out, and they advise us of that. So no, there's no other instances of bolts being removed. They accept that bolts are required for climbing. Climbing is a recognised activity in the management plans where we climb, and they accept that maintenance is something that needs to be undertaken to keep those installations safe. Back in, I think it was 2014, I think, or maybe a little bit later, I think it was more like 2020. We, in consultation with QPWS, we have a operational policy for management of climbing in protected areas. And that mentions bolting and the acceptance that maintenance must occur. And it's a good policy. It actually kind of provides a little bit more substance and granularity to a management plan which says rock climbing is a permitted activity. It gives more guidance to both the climbing community and to the rangers. Yeah,
so we don't have that for slacklining and highlining. I mean, what's the benefits of being included as an activity in the management plan? What's the benefit of having a policy in place like that?
I'll kind of reverse it a little bit. You guys aren't a recognised activity in national parks, and I think that's your first hurdle. You need to have some sort of recognition that slacklining can occur in a park, and then perhaps do something under a visitor management strategy for a particular area, and perhaps even look at down the track an operational policy.
Yeah.
But firstly, I think you just need to seek recognition.
Because without that,
you're kind of in the Wild West.
Which would get away with for a while, but you would foresee that you wouldn't get away with that forever.
No. You guys are an incorporated association,
we are,
aren't you?
Yeah, Australian Slacklining. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably got to be a high priority item for the association.
Yeah, and the association took it on, I guess, with the Blue Mountains as the first area they hit up, and had some positive discussions with parks by the sound of it. In the end, it was included in the draft management plan as an activity requiring a permit or a consent or a restricted activity. Big challenge there, I guess.
Getting a permit's the next thing.
Yeah.
So all you need is, and as soon as you get a permit for something that's perceived as high risk, or look, if I was sitting in an office in town having to sign off on a permit for slacklining, I'd probably go, I don't want to put my name to this.
Yeah.
We had experience in the past where it's years ago now, there was a pro forma for doing bolt maintenance, and there were a couple that were signed off, and then suddenly it's like, no, we can't sign this. I'm not putting my name to this. You guys are dangling off a rope with a drill.
So you got that personal liability option when you got someone who wants to sign on the dotted line. So I think permits are a particular issue.
We need it in the management plan as a permitted activity without requiring a permit for sure.
Yep, and as part of the visitor management strategy for that park,
okay.
You can go into some granularity about where you can do it in the park and under what auspices.
So that's around parks.
Yeah.
Parks get given a park to manage as part of their procedure for managing it. They figure out what they're going to allow in the park and what they're not. And then as part of what they're going to allow in the park, they then have a procedure to manage the visitors that come into the park to do that activity. Is that?
I'll wind it back a little. The process they use in Queensland is a values-based management framework, which is, a bureaucratic speak for, well, we've got to look at the various values for the uses of the park. And you've got values such as environmental, cultural, recreation. There's actually, I think there's 4 sections that are iterated in the beginning of the Nature Conservation Act. So the 4th one escapes me, but I'm sure it'll be obvious when I read it. But they assess how a park is managed in the high-level management plan through the values-based management framework. And from that plan, we would then look at a sub-document such as a visitor management strategy. So if they say rock climbing is okay here, we would go to the next document and go, all right, well, how are we managing climbing in this park?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And so back to ACAQ and membership and so forth. I mean, why does becoming a member matter? Like, does it have an impact?
It does. It's very useful, and if we actually can get our structure in place where we get on the path of land acquisition, well, membership equals cash in the bank. It's currently set up as a fighting fund if there's any legal challenges, but we could look at restructuring finances to have a land trust fund. It's a model they use in the States, but they've got vast resources, and I think there's a revenue of about $10 million a year for the access fund. And what they do is if something comes on the market, they'll go ahead and purchase it, and then they'll mortgage it back to the local climbing coalition. It's a good model. It'd be nice to get down that path. The other aspect is I've been talking to quite a few politicians this year, and one of the most common questions is how many members do you have? We've got 3,500 Facebook followers. There's 6,000 or 7,000 people following the Southeast Queensland Facebook page. But we have nowhere near, probably under 1,000. I haven't looked recently, but it's under 500 actual financial members.
Yeah.
So we could do a whole lot better. It's $20 a year, for God's sake.
So it's not
less than the price of a gym membership.
Yeah.
Gym
so it's not even the money so much, really. It's been about able to sit down with a politician and say, "Hey, don't ignore us. There's a couple of thousand people at least here that matter."
Yeah, exactly. That are members of the organisation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're probably the 2 main aspects. It would be nice to have enough money in the bank to go and purchase a crag off a freehold owner.
Yeah, and so there's crags, I guess, available to purchase, really, because it's not like the farmer can do much with them. You're not running your sheep on the cliff.
Yeah. As you said earlier, it's a delicate matter with certainly people that's very much in love with their land to open the section up to the public. But, it's if you don't try, you'll never know.
And there's some positives there. I mean, working in a national park, you're always going to have restrictions. It's their land; they can make the rules. You engage with them, but if you have your own land, then you can make your own rules, subject to your liability or whatever you need to sort out.
Yeah, or the amenity of neighbours, or the ethics that you want to employ there. You can certainly make some rules, and certainly the local community could benefit. Even the landowner could decide to set an area aside for camping and charge a few bucks for that. And yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's been a really good discussion around access and slacklining and highlining. I mean, what didn't we cover? Is there anything we didn't cover that we should talk about?
You've got the list, but I think we went through the list of things we covered in a random manner. So do we need to expand on any particular issues that the slacklining community is facing? Has there been any recent warnings issued, or?
There's a few sort of areas, I guess. I mean, we've been shut down or told not to highline at the ACAQ water Mulgrew Dam, and right. I think there's probably an opportunity to engage with them. We haven't really gone down the avenue of even engaging with them, and we really need.
What was the reason for that?
They didn't give one. The one time I was there, I was getting yelled at from the boat by the cops and the ACAQ water, and it wasn't really possible to get down to their level, I guess, to talk to them. So I guess that's the first question. Is that what we need to do? As the first question is, what's the reason for asking us to take it down?
That's exactly. And then you take that home and you go, well, is that overreach? Is it actually covered by anything in their regulations? And then once you establish that particular line of intelligence, you go, well, is it worth having a meeting with someone at a managerial level? And discussing the issue.
And I guess that's worth doing. I mean, the takeaway from this conversation is it is worth having these conversations, and we can have wins. It's not just, I guess it's a question. I mean, can we have wins? We're not just going to have losses.
Yes. Build your oppressors into allies and start working with them. You got to understand that the land manager has power to manage that land, whereas you don't have any power as a user. If they are applying their regulations, you don't have a right. You're actually in transgression of a reg.
And
so make friends.
And what about there's probably a portion of the slacklining community that would just prefer to fly under the radar and just keep getting away with it, I guess, as long as we can get away with it.
There's always that element: mountain biking, climbing, base jumping.
And is there much?
There's always that rogue element.
Is there much we can do about that? I mean, should we bother to try, or is it just an education process that, hey, we might have more success if we're proactive rather than,
I think all we've got is the education piece, making sure that people understand exactly what they're doing. So if you can target let's say a rogue operator, you sit down and have that conversation saying, do you understand, what you can and can't do here? And then you just go and after, with that knowledge, it's now your choice.
And what do you see, I guess, looking from the outside, as the challenges specific to slacklining, say, when we're talking to land managers? What's our...
I think we've covered it reasonably well. They need to understand it. They need to understand how safe it is, why you do it, the level of impact it has on the particular site. I would hazard that you guys are very low impact compared to climbing. So that explanation piece, I think, is the first thing.
I hadn't thought about that, but I guess we're not really climbing the cliff. We attach at either end, and then we're walking in the air, so we're not really having as much impact.
Not really. So, and I guess deconflicting other user groups. Maybe deconflicting with popular climbing areas or paragliding or whatever.
The bushwalkers seem to be the main interaction. I know there was a negative interaction with some highliners camping where camping's not permitted and camping sort of in the middle of the path. And
well, that's camping. That's not highlining. So they were probably right.
Yeah. So we've had some. I guess the only negative interactions I sort of know on is those bushwalker groups and
And I guess you need to negotiate with a land manager as to how long you can leave a rig set up.
Yeah, that seems to be one too. Is it? I think it's in our code of conduct at the moment to have a rig attended. So that would mean
Yeah.
if you're leaving it up overnight, you sort of camp near it. Is my interpretation.
Yeah, or be there by dawn.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Yeah, which we generally.
Well, that's the sort of stuff you got to start sharing with QPWS or other land managers.
Yeah.
ACAQ water, and that forms part of your conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so, I guess to wrap up, what motivates you to keep doing it, I guess? I mean, you must be positive enough about it that it's going to make a difference. What motivates you to...
Yeah, my perspective is I'd like to get a framework in place where it could be handed on nicely. So we've got a process for managing all aspects of climbing within parks, a process where we can have some level of trusteeship in other areas, that kind of thing. Also to have our, the boring stuff like the admin streamlined, so the next bunch of volunteers don't have to wade through clunky systems or, spend hours looking for a document, just getting all that streamlined. So you can just pass it on. I would probably give it a couple more years, but it's something you can't walk away from until the right person comes along.
Is it a little bit for the next generation that you're doing it? Like some of these things aren't going to happen overnight, are they? Like the work that you're doing.
True, and the level of engagement for people much younger than me is very heartening. I'm 62 now, and to be out there working with 20, 30, 40-year-olds and having them enthusiastic is personally very, very satisfying. Keeps me young, I think. And you get a perspective that you wouldn't normally get if you were just doing P&O cruises.
Yeah. So, I guess you guys need more members. More members would help you guys. I imagine a few volunteers.
Financial members, yeah definitely. And we don't seem to have too much of an issue getting volunteers. Quite often with stuff that's coming under the parks volunteer program, they limit the numbers. I mean, we had a limit of 6 for any vertical activity.
Yeah, I think Australian Slacklining, we could definitely use more financial members to boost that when we're talking to politicians, but also I think more people involved in projects, talking to land managers and so forth. We've got access representatives in each state. And
it doesn't need to be daunting. It's, you might have someone who's got a specialist skill and it's like, can I just leave you in the top drawer till we need you? And it might be one task a year. If something pops up, it's like, well, we need to have someone with this particular skill to do that little thing. So not many hours a year. It's the old many hands make light work. And having some good specialists, obviously lawyers are good. But people that are skilled in media, know how to write things, scientific backgrounds. If we have ecologists, we've got a wonderful botanist on our books who does pretty amazing work. So those kind of skill areas particularly are useful for us.
Yeah, I think we're the same. I mean, we can use people from a marketing and communications point of view. We can use people to meet with the land managers. I think the cultural understanding, a cultural awareness space is one that, we want to get as knowledgeable as we can, I guess, given Grampians and things like that.
Yeah. It's something we struggle with as well, but you do what you can do within the legislation at the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's. I guess thanks for your time today, and
my pleasure, Dan.
Talking about climbing and access.
Always happy to. Yeah. Always happy to chat.
All right. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Dan.